Jones, educator, MC, coffee nerd, and we have a really, really amazing episode. Y'all know it's Black History Month, and at Coffee Black, we're all about educating people about the Black history of coffee, but also using coffee and Black culture to really be imaginative and creative about creating a Black future and generational wealth across the diaspora, for Black people around the world. And so I wanted to start off today's episode just by talking about some of the history between African-American communities and the Ethiopian community. I'm actually set up over at our anti-gentrification coffee club today, as you can see, not in the usual setup. And I'm really excited because this episode is powerful, yo. We're really going to be looking at some history that I think gets ignored far too often. So what I want to do is be able to share my screen with you all. And let's get into that. Share this joint. Here, I want to show you some interesting information from 1935. So all the way back in 1935, there was a fight between Joe Louis and Primo Carnera. Now, in America at the time, Pan-Africanism, if you're familiar with Marcus Garvey, was becoming really popular, right? He and W.E.B. Du Bois were doing a lot of fighting in America to get rights for African Americans. And within this space, it was really important to support and be in solidarity with African nations who were at the same time fighting against the rush for Africa. And so in this moment, there was only one really. There may be a few others that I'm missing, but there was one that stood out in the mind of a lot of African Americans: free Black nation. Right at the time, that was Ethiopia, and Ethiopia had just fought off an invasion from the Italians. And it's interesting when a lot of people think about coffee culture, they think about Italy, right? Espresso, latte, cappuccino, right? And it's one of those things where, unfortunately, for a lot of people, that is our opinion. That's our introduction to coffee, is from its culturally appropriated version. We never learned about Buna. We never learned about the Jabina. We don't learn about the Ethiopian history, the culture behind coffee. And so for a lot of African Americans, it's like, we want to stand in solidarity with our Black brothers and sisters in Ethiopia. And there's a complicated history there too, but it's important to know that the New York police were so afraid of this solidarity, they brought 1,500 police officers to the stadium where the fight was happening. And at a certain point, it got to where there were actually African Americans organizing war veterans to go and fight on behalf of Ethiopia. So it says thousands of Black men had signed up to fight, drawn by idealism, racial solidarity, the promise of a steady job. So you had 1,500 in Philadelphia, 8,000 in Chicago, 5,000 in Detroit, 2,000 in Kansas City, right? It's really crazy to think that there was a point in our history where Black men were ready to go fight on behalf of Ethiopia and go and possibly risk their life for other Black people across the world. And it was a beautiful moment. So let's do some quick math, right? We got 8,000 plus 5,000, that's 13,000, right? Then you have in New York, another 15,000, that's 14,500, and then you have another 1,000, so that's 15,500, and you have 2,000 in Detroit, that's 17,000 people, right, who are ready to go. And unfortunately, by the time they got to the border, they would check, because if you're registered in one country's army, you can't really go fight for another country. But that moment of solidarity ended up actually bringing the emperor of Ethiopia to come down and support and gift a cross from the Coptic church, from the Ethiopian Orthodox Church to a church, I think it was Abyssinia Church in Harlem, in solidarity for that movement. And I think we have a cool opportunity here today to actually represent a similar kind of solidarity. And so we are going to be addressing that today with two wonderful activists, two Tigray activists who are here with us today. We have Shava and Eden. They reached out to us, and I just thought what they had to say was really powerful. And especially it being Black History Month, we have an opportunity to engage in that kind of solidarity where our communities can stand up for each other. And, my background with the Oromo people, we've had a lot of support from them in the start of our company. Shout out to my brother Ibrahim. Shout out to my brother Oromo Coffee Beans in Australia. They supported us during the Black Lives Matter movement. They supported us with what happened in George Floyd. And I think it's an important opportunity to return that support here with the humanitarian crisis that's going on. Now, I am not an expert in some of the ethnic conflict in Ethiopia, so we're going to bring in our wonderful activist, Shava and Eden, to address some of these issues and educate us a little bit. How y'all doing today?
How are you?
Very cool. I'm blessed. You're blessed, fam. Yeah, I'm good. And I'm really excited about this conversation. I think this is an important conversation to be able to present to other. We're in a pretty strong community of like people who are fighting to tell the Black story, of African Americans specifically, who are fighting to tell the Black history of coffee and its connection to the slave trade and its origins in Ethiopia and how it's been culturally appropriated. And I think it's important in this that we take advantage of opportunities to build relationships, to learn history, and also to support financially or use whatever influence we have to be in solidarity. So would you mind just sharing a little bit about yourself and then catching us up on kind of the conflict that's happening right now?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Eden.
What up?
I'm from Philly. And yeah, like you said, we're Tigray Ethiopians. And so we're here to talk about like the Tigray conflict that's been going on in Tigray, Ethiopia for the past 93 days now. Yeah, I'll let Shava talk about herself too.
Yeah, I'm Shava. I'm also from the Philly area, and I think Ida and I both have been sort of thrust into this sort of activist role as this, frankly, genocide has started in our homeland, pretty much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's crazy to think about everything that's going on. I know I've read things here and there. This is kind of a big deal with the Ethiopian coffee harvest is coming up. And I did a bit of research on the boycott Ethiopian movement. And I know that there was a boycott of the airlines recently. Is that correct? Is that still going on?
Yeah. So although there's like the crisis and the war going on, the genocidal war going on in Tigray, in the other parts of Ethiopia, people of that are ethnically Tigrayan are being discriminated against. Like on Ethiopian Airlines, they're not. Most of them are not being allowed to board the airline because of their ethnicity, and they're being turned around at the airport, and for no other reason other than their ethnicity. So other people, actually not us, but other people decided to start a movement where they boycott the Ethiopian Airlines. And although most people are not like flying right now because of COVID, their cargo business has been doing pretty well. So they were trying to target them that way and have like businesses find other ways to get their goods into Ethiopia.
And can you elaborate, by targeting the airlines, that influences the government? No, it puts pressure on the government. Can you elaborate a little bit on how that works? Like when you're boycotting the airlines, a lot of people may say, well, how does that affect what's happening with Tigray people other than standing in solidarity? I know y'all mentioned earlier, like taxes. So,
well, Ethiopian Airlines is directly owned by the government, so it is a state-run agency. It is fully and 100% funding this genocide. Anything paid in cargo fees, anything paid as a seat ticket, right? All of that goes straight to the government. None of it is. It's not a private corporation. It's not going to benefit any individuals with a business in Ethiopia. It is all going to the government. Any profit they make is 100% funding their efforts to suppress journalists, to imprison journalists, to try and kill all the people in Tigray pretty much, and also to even harm the Oromo people as well, like they have been for years.
Wow, that's powerful. And I think that's one thing that I think it's just important to note, like when we think about how different countries operate, we have to understand that like each country is going to operate differently. And so like that piece, that's a state-run organization. Whereas in America, you know, the airlines may be funded, they may be bailed out by the government. The profit doesn't go directly back. So it's important to note that. Now, let's kind of get into coffee. Can you tell us a little bit before we get into what kind of the idea, which I think is a crazy revolutionary idea y'all proposing. Tell us a little bit about the history of coffee in Ethiopia as you've heard it, and also kind of what that means to you, you know?
Yeah, Ethiopian coffee has been a part of my life, and I think Eden's life since we were first born, because Ethiopian coffee is a pretty much, if possible, a daily ritual. You know, it's not something that you may or may not have in your household. Like there's some Americans who don't grow up on coffee. It's weird to me that people drink coffee so much later in their lives, or they think that like coffee is something that you have to wake up when. It's like a social thing. It is 100% part of the social framework of Ethiopian culture. And Eden and I have grown up in Tigray culture, right? And so Coffee is a large part of that. It brings together friends, family, conversation about pretty much everything happens over bunna. It's not a joke.
Yeah, that's powerful. I think I had a quote from my bro Ibrahim. He said, for the Oromo people, but I think this goes for yourself. From what I'm hearing, it goes for a lot of people in Ethiopia, is that coffee is not just a drink to get you going, it's connection. It's connection to family, it's connection to your creator, it's connection to life, it's everything. To the Oromo people, coffee is everything. And like that quote is, as we build out our space, is one of like the posters that we have to like kind of represent that mentality for like, yo, this is a different way to think about coffee than the traditional European perspective or American perspective a lot of us had growing up. You know, I was exposed to coffee via Folgers, you know what I mean, growing up. And like, I have fond memories with my grandparents and with my parents, but like, I didn't know there was a history until my father went to Kenya. He was like, okay, cool. Like, this is the thing, coffee is in Kenya. And even then, it wasn't until later that I did the origin of coffee is in Ethiopia and that it's been stolen, right? It's a $200 billion industry. And yet the Oromo people are suffering, the Tigray people are suffering, there's conflict in Ethiopia. And I remember just asking my bros, like, this feels like how I feel when people talk about hip hop. You know, hip hop being this thing that was an African-American discovery, and yet it's sold all over the world. People love it everywhere, but they seem to hate us. You know what I mean? Like, when we're killed in the news, like, it's funny. You know what I mean? It's a joke. But you listen to our music. You know what I mean? Like, how do you do that and ignore our suffering? How do you consume our creations but ignore the conflict in our culture? You know what I mean? And I think that same mentality is why I feel what you're saying when you talk about what's happening in Ethiopia right now, because there's so much conflict, and yet the thing that you all have discovered that the world loves, right, is not really being leveraged fully to benefit the people who discovered it, right? A lot of times they end up being forgotten, and it becomes this, like I said, cappuccino. Like, it turns into, we're not even speaking an African language at this point. Like, what's going on? One of my bros at Portrait Coffee says coffee only grows where Black and brown people do. You know what I mean? Like, you can't even grow coffee in Italy. You're like, what's going on? How do you get this mentality? So yeah, tell us a little bit about the idea you're proposing and some of the ideas you have as far as how we can leverage coffee to bring awareness to what's going on and be in solidarity, much like what happened with the Joe Frazier fight back in 1935.
Yeah. Well, should we talk about the conflict first?
Yeah, please address the conflict as well. Give us some background on that, and then kind of how coffee can be used or leveraged to provide solidarity.
Yeah, okay, so most people don't know, but like for the past 93 days, so officially 3 months now, there's been a genocidal war going on in the Tigray region of Ethiopia. And there's a communication blackout, there's an internet blackout, there's no aid access into the region, and among many other things. So that's part of the reason why people don't know about it, because like the people that are suffering right now in Tigray are suffering in silence. They're being silenced. Wow. So that's why it was up to us in the diaspora to really speak up for them, even though we don't have all the facts on the ground. There's been some, like, from the refugees leaving to Sudan, there's been some news coming out, so we have an idea of the extent of the suffering that they've been going through.
Wow.
And yeah, so there's been like heavy artillery being used. Like there's been reports of drone attacks, massacres. There's door-to-door looting through like all the villages of people, like troops going into people's houses and just looting the things that they have, like the beds, the chairs, all the way down to like utensils. There's been reports of looting everything that people have. So this war started off as like it was supposed to be like a law enforcement operation, just to borrow the words of the prime minister. But it's really looks like the goal is to decimate the region, like decimate Tigray and bring the people back to poverty, and also just starve the people into, like, basically just starve them to death. That's what food is being weaponized right now. So hunger is being like weaponized. Rape is being weaponized across the region. So there's just so many things going on, but the news is not coming out because there's no, like, journalists are not allowed to go into the region. There's a media blackout. So we have to use our voices in every way that we can to raise awareness, and that's what we're glad to be on your podcast today. Just to share what's going on right now. The people that are suffering can't speak up for themselves, so that's why Shava and I are really trying to among other people in the diaspora. They're really trying to spread awareness and shed light on what's going on in the Tigray region. Like the government's intention is to basically do this in silence, just have like no one in the world know about what's going on and just have this genocidal war in silence. But we're here to like speak up and say like, no, like even though we can't help them right now physically, that we're going to speak up and say like the one thing you're not going to do is kill our people in silence. You're not going to starve and rape our people. And
come on now.
And let the world know that what's going on in Tigray and what's been going on for too long. The war was officially declared over on November, the end of November, but it's been 2 months later now, and there's no aid access still in the region. Most of the region is still in a communication media blackout, internet blackout across the whole region. So if you're covering it up like that and you're trying to say everything is fine, you're trying to tell the world like, oh, they're back to normal, the war is over. So why can't we speak to them? Why are we still hearing reports of mass rape? Like people are still starving. There's reports of people that have already starved to death. So we really this is a really urgent crisis. There's so many different layers, there's so many different factors of this crisis, so it's hard to like focus on just one thing. There's the famine, the rapes, there's the bombs, the massacres, in different like religious places, like so people were getting massacred in churches, in mosques.
Wow.
So because there's so many different layers, there's so many things going on, it's hard to focus on one thing, but it's kind of like a brief summary of everything that's happening, but we can go more into depth of like some things that you guys want to focus on, but there's just a lot that's been going on for the past 93 days.
Wow. Shava, did you have anything to add to that?
I think for the thing that I wanted to bring into it is why we're even talking about coffee in relation to this genocide. And I think Eden and I were both really frustrated with our efforts to try and bring awareness, we even were a part of a fundraising campaign for refugees in Sudan, which is a whole nother thing. But I think we were just so frustrated and didn't know what to do and didn't know how to get people's attention, because we would post things and get one reply, two comments, one like, 3 likes, right? And we're like, we want somebody to hear us, and so somebody outside of our circle, because we felt like we were only reaching the people who live in our community, who are a part of our community already, and we wanted to get a further reach. And the first thing that came to my mind was coffee, because it is, Ethiopia's largest industry is agriculture, and this is something I learned taking, and so like everything I say, take it with a little bit of a grain of salt, because I learned this was taking an international business course and choosing Ethiopia as my topic to get through it. So
no, the history of, at least for African Americans, the history of college students being revolutionary and essential for freedom efforts is well started. Like Huey P. Newton, right? Like the civil rights movement happened because of college students, in part by people like MLK and SCLC, but like SNCC, the Student Nonviolent, I forget what the other 3 letters stand for, but like that was started by college students, and those were the people who are risking their lives, right? And that's oftentimes like people get so concerned about, everything else that's happening. When you're in college, you're in a really unique place to be able to see what's happening, right? And so I think it's important that we listen to our youth and listen to our leaders. And I say youth, I just turned 30, but like it's important to hear, you know what I mean? Like, so that's not a reason for you to be ignored. Like historically, at least from an African American perspective, that's more validity for your point. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think that comes from when you give a college student a project and they're a minority, they try to relate to the project to get it done, to try and like cope with the course load. We try and pick topics that are close to home, and when we do that, we learn some dark things about our origins. We learn some scary things, and we get like sort of this informational leverage that we can use later. And like part of what I learned was that the largest business in Ethiopia is agriculture, and that in agriculture, one of the largest cash crops basically is coffee, and it's the largest export to the United States from Ethiopia. Just coffee. So we originally thought we could leverage that sort of financial situation that is dependent on U.S. exports from Ethiopia to like burden the government by taking away their tax dollars. But on like further consideration and talks with people in the actual coffee industry, it became more and more clear that we would be putting like this undue burden on farmers. And when and even though it's well intentioned, like it's not like we didn't want to put that undue burden on the farmers, especially since they were in typically underserved and underdeveloped regions. And like a lot of them are, like you said, they're Oromo. They're not a part of this like group of people who are pushing for genocide right now for the most part.
And I think that's one of the things when we talk, I think a lot about, you know, the history of freedom movements in the diaspora and how those can be leveraged to like, you know, provide strategies for the future. And so for us, I know recently, you know, we talked about a boycott when George Floyd was killed in the African American community, about boycotting Starbucks, boycotting a couple other places, white coffee businesses, and trying to intentionally buy black. And one of the things that I know I talk to our consumers about on the podcast was like, yo, if you're going to do a boycott, you have to have it strategically done. And so people in history, they imagine, you know, the Birmingham boycott as like, oh yeah, you know, people they just decided not to ride the bus, and then, you know, Bull Connor decided to stop lynching people and burning people, and like they just stopped. But the reality was they had to create a whole separate ecosystem, a separate economy, basically. They were doing Uber before Uber was a thing. They were doing Black Uber. You know what I mean? They had to put people on private rides to get to work, to get to the grocery store, in order to make a boycott and not endanger the most vulnerable in the community. So I think for South, and when everybody's not on board. And like my wife's grandfather was a sanitation worker, and he marched with Dr. King in Memphis. And like there was a big part of that movement was like them saying we're on strike, we're not going back to work because two people got crushed alive inside of Echo Cole, and Robert Walker got crushed alive inside of a garbage truck. And they didn't do it because they wouldn't let Black people ride on the inside of the truck. So they had to stand outside. It was raining. They slipped inside and they were crushed to death with the trash. And so like when that happened, people were like, yo, we have to do something. But a big part of doing something is we all have to do it for it to be effective. And if there's someone who's like, well, I'm vulnerable, I'm poor, so I'm just going to do whatever puts food on the table, which is understandable, and we don't think about them or consider them, sometimes then that creates opportunities for, you know, what we would call an op. And you know what I mean? Like we would call it like, you know, people to come in and infiltrate the movement. And we historically know the CIA has been a big part of breaking apart civil rights movements in America. And we know that like people just don't like free Black people. Same thing happened to Haiti. You know, when they got free, they stopped selling their coffee, like the world wouldn't buy it. So I think in this situation, you're wise. Like I think that was really wise of you all to say that, which just speaks to like, yo, we need to listen to our youth. You know what I mean? Like college students really are wiser than people giving credit for. I remember being in college and just having a burden for justice, you know? And so like, that's powerful. So you all decided to kind of pivot from the moratorium on purchasing green coffee, specifically considering, you know, I know for our company, we purchase all of our coffee from Oromia, and like we have commitments to different farmers with some of our collabs. We don't want to like break those and then people can't eat, right? What you had a secondary idea that I thought was pretty dope. So would you mind sharing that?
Yeah. So the sort of adaptation that we came up with, this sort of that preserves this political pressure that we want to put on the government that's causing that is committing genocide, rather than putting the undue burden on the farmers, is to do a month-long boycott of serving Ethiopian coffee, basically. So we're saying that from February 15th until March 15th, we're asking coffee businesses who stand in solidarity and against genocide to refrain from serving Ethiopian coffee and to make some sort of either statement or to have some sort of something on their menu that says we aren't serving this because this is happening. And like if you are involved with coffee, you care about coffee, and you want to drink good coffee, which Ethiopia can give you, then you need so you need to be aware, and you need to be aware of the complex nature of this good. And the reason that you need to be aware of it is because it does contribute the tax dollars to that government that is committing genocide. So we're asking people to refrain from serving it and to also start a conversation around this genocide so that American consumers can have a more informed and complicated view of this coffee that they're drinking, and they can reach out to their representatives in the House and the Senate to put more political pressure on the government so that we can get more of a strong stance from the U.S. government to the Ethiopian government saying, this has got to stop. You can't do this. You're breaking international law. You are committing genocide. Clearly, you are ethnic profiling people. We have to have, there are U.S. citizens of Tigray descent who were stuck in Tigray for months and who made their way all the way to like Addis or to some other place where there's an airport and had to be walked onto the airplane by embassy officials in order to get back here. They were not going to be left on that plane. If they didn't have the embassy official with them, they were going to get kicked off the plane for being from Tigray.
Wow.
So we're asking people to refrain from selling Ethiopian coffee on the state side, right, for a whole month, so that they can tell all the consumers who are like, well, where's the Ethiopian coffee that I like so much? This is what's going on in Ethiopia right now, and we're refraining for this month.
That's powerful, fam. Like, we have a statement that we created actually after George Floyd was killed that I think is kind of perfect for this movement, but we created this statement, and it just says, love Black people like you love Black coffee. You know what I mean? Which is like, if you're going to consume someone's creation, if you're going to participate in their discovery, then you should be compassionate to their descent, right? You should be compassionate to their destruction, possibly, and work in solidarity, right? It doesn't make sense to say, yo, I love Ethiopian coffee, but you ignore Ethiopian people.
And
right?
that word you use, destruction, is key here, because they aren't just destroying buildings. They're not just destroying people's crops. They're not just destroying humanitarian access to the area. They're destroying the livelihood, the families. They're destroying children. They're destroying an entire ethnic group based solely on the fact that they don't like them. There is no other reason for this.
Wow.
For this genocide. There is no other reason for the ridiculous violations of international law that we're seeing, other than they don't like them.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy, fam. Well, I think that this is a great point to end on. It's like, yo, we're gonna make this commitment in our cafe, our neighborhood spot. This is where we do a lot of our educational work. Like, we're not going to sell our coffee. Is called Gucci Man. You know what I mean? It's from Gucci. And we're not gonna sell it. Like, you cannot get a cup of this in our local cafe like for this month, because we want to stand in solidarity. And I understand that, for a lot of Black shops, there are complicated issues, like thinking about, man, like, you got to hit the bottom line. It's a pandemic. We're already a Black business, so maybe we're starting behind the 8 ball, and you feel like, man, I don't know if we can make this commitment. I don't know if, I'm not saying, I'm not requiring anyone to do this, but we're going to make this commitment because this is intentional for us. And we made this space, like the anti-gentrification coffee club. Like, look, here we go. We made this because we want to be able to say, like, we want to stand in solidarity, and we want to be intentional about the way we use and think about, our products. And so it's intentional. It's important for us to like make those choices. And I think everybody has to make their own choices, but we want to stand in solidarity with you all and not serve it here at the shop. Our community has grown to love Ethiopian coffee. We spend all of our time really intentionally. We kind of try to draw from the right of like serving coffee communally each morning. We call it the first sip, and really try to create. It's a lot of poverty in our neighborhood, so just try to create times and places for people to come together and to uplift the Ethiopian community or the various communities where we source our coffee from, and tell the story of the Black people who grew this thing, right? And I think that in telling that story, it's a great opportunity to say, look, this is what's going on in the country right now. Isn't this similar to like how we were treated, 20 years ago? Like, this is how our mothers and fathers were treated. And like, this is an opportunity for us to fight against this type of, prejudice in the world. And so I think it's a beautiful space. I'm excited to have these conversations. I'm excited for people to be able to have this conversation in the podcast. We're just about finished with my time, but I have to go pick up my son from school. But I did want to check in with you all and just say, like, if people want to learn more, if they want to follow you all, like, where can they learn more about what's going on?
So there's a various websites that people have created just like since this crisis started. One is Omna Tigray. So it's OMNA, and Tigray is TIGRAY.org. And that's where you can find like all the resources. We're doing a lot of Twitter campaigns. We're doing a lot of campaigns of like reaching out to various UN Security Council members as well. And yeah, that's where you can find like all the different updates of what we've been like our advocacy. And also for, like on Twitter or on Instagram, you can check out the hashtag Tigray Genocide or Stop War on Tigray. We've been using those two hashtags to get the word out, and you could definitely share. We recommend you guys share those hashtags as well to spread more awareness. Yeah, we really do appreciate you for standing in solidarity with us. We do understand there's some people who are going to say, you know, we can't stop selling it even if it's for a month. And I said we do understand those people who say like we can't afford to stop selling Ethiopian coffee for a month. And we would say to them like just spread awareness. Also advocate for the people of Tigray by reaching out to your local representatives, spreading the awareness on social media through the hashtag that we suggested. So there are other ways to advocate, although we are pushing for this month-long boycott, and we appreciate anyone who would join us. There are other ways to advocate for those who feel like they can't afford to do this boycott. We understand as well.
Yeah, I think that that's one of those things where we can be creative, right? And think about like, as a community, how can we support each other so that all of us, or as many of us who want to participate, can. And I'm not sure what that looks like, but I'm a really big believer in like the ethos of hip hop and the ethos of like creating things out of nothing. You know, hip hop was made when people had the music programs cut in their schools. So they didn't have instruments, they didn't have access to equal education. So they used technology to compensate and started sampling songs that their parents used to listen to on record. And that was one of the biggest, one of the biggest genres in the world. So I think my dad calls it Afro engineering. You know what I mean? I think that we as a people can really think about ways to create it. Some folks in the hood might call it another term like nigger rigging. You know what I mean? But like, I think Afro engineering has more, dignity to it. But how do you want to think about like there's ways we can support each other as businesses even. And one idea I have, I'm gonna talk about it with you all offline, is maybe creating a page to highlight businesses who are partnering with you all. So that way those businesses can sell other products, and maybe people who want to support the movement, instead of purchasing Ethiopian coffee, to purchase other products from those businesses so that they can stay afloat long enough to keep talking about what's going on. And I definitely would love to have a follow-up conversation with you all in a month to see kind of what was the effect, with an update on what's going on. So you all have my calendar. Let's book that. But my time is pretty much up for today. Thank y'all so much for joining us. Thank y'all for like speaking up, for taking a risk. I know this isn't easy. It's complicated. Activism work is difficult, but you all are really doing the hard work. And we got some people online who have chimed in as well. Thanks for the conversation from Ladora. We appreciate you. And somebody else said, thank you so much for sharing and boldly loving and supporting people who are oppressed. Hey, this is what we're here for. We say make coffee black again. We're not joking around. You know what I mean? So this is what we want to do. And we really want to try to live out that statement of loving Black people like we love Black coffee, like we love Black culture and Black creation. So appreciate y'all. Yeah, this is what we're here for, fam. We with y'all. Man, stay blessed, stay up, and y'all keep that coffee black. Peace.